So today we are going to have Dr. Amarasinghe, who is, as a few of you may know, he is one of our leading pediatricians. But this is about a much older boy, ZHENG or Ching Ho, as he appeared in our textbooks when we were much younger. So, ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Dr. Amarasinghe. You are not here to listen to me. But before that, I would invite your attention to the usual fantastic collection of books available for sale here on the right from Mr. Medis's collection, and some of Dr. Amarasinghe's own books in English and Sinhala are there. May I invite Dr. Amarasinghe to speak to us.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Devendra, for that kind introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the council members of the Colombo chapter of the Ceylon Society of Australia, its president, Mr. Devendra, and Mr. Anandana Lanka, who is the secretary of the association, for inviting me to deliver this lecture on the 15th century interactions between Sri Lanka and China. Actually, this is the fifth time I am delivering this lecture. This shows that there is great interest among public about this subject. I feel it's because we live in an era where China is making great strides in economic development and is engaged in foreign trade. Sri Lanka is in the middle of One Road, One Belt initiative and is one of the countries of the string of pearls between China and Africa. Therefore, there is great interest among many to know about the past history of the interactions between Sri Lanka and China. Of all historical periods, it's the 15th century where there was intense relationships between Sri Lanka and China, and there's a lot of incidents which happened during the 15th century have been either not studied properly and sometimes misinterpreted and misunderstood. This is because of the reason that all the historical facts related to this century, the 15th century, became available only recently. The book I wrote about it is an attempt to correctly represent the historical facts available about the incidents which happened during the 15th century. So what I will be describing is a very interesting historical story. It's almost like a detective story, which I did. If you go through the history books of Sri Lanka, in many of them, we mention that the Chinese army came in the 15th century to Sri Lanka and abducted the king. Some of these books say that this king was abducted from Kotte. Some of the other books say he was abducted from Gampola. And some books say that he was abducted from Raigam. And as to which port this Chinese army came is also was controversial. Some of the history books say that they came to Colombo harbor, and some say they came to Gaul. But none of them describe as to why this army came all the way from China to Sri Lanka and abduct an unknown king and take him all the way to China. So for a long time, as a student of history, I have been interested in history from my childhood, though I became a medical doctor later. I wondered why this happened. Why should a Chinese army come to Sri Lanka and abduct the king? What was the reason? So, before me, many eminent historians have attempted to solve this puzzle. First to do this was Sir Emerson Tennant, who was a colonial secretary to Ceylon in 1840s. Then Professor Senarath Paranavithana and Professor G.P.V. Somarath of Colombo University has attempted to solve this puzzle. But unfortunately for them, all the historical data related to this incident were not available at that time. Fortunately, I had the access to most of these primary data recently, and then I decided to embark on the journey of solving this mystery. So about 6 years back, I decided to solve this historical puzzle, and it took me about 2 to 3 years to understand fully what has happened. In doing so, I was able to get the original translations of Chinese records for the first time. And they have been translated into English by the National University of Singapore, and it's in a website. So you go to that website, type Sri Lanka in a window, you get all the records related to Sri Lanka. And then you match it with the historical chronicles of Sri Lanka and literature of that era. And by doing so, I could solve most of the issues related to these incidents. During next 30 minutes or so, I'll be describing my findings in brief. And how I did this is described in my book. So I will start this story from China. 600 years ago, in the year 1405, Ming Emperor Shu De sent Admiral ZHENG on a series of expeditions to the Indian Ocean, which the Chinese describe as the Western Ocean, because the Indian Ocean is to the west of China, with a fleet of 30,000 troops in 300 ships. So this name of ZHENG is pronounced in China as Zheng, and sometimes it's pronounced as Xingho. So it's pronounced differently, but for the Chinese, he is Zheng. So I managed to pronounce this only recently correctly in Chinese. So during these 30 years, this fleet of ships visited 30 kingdoms between China and the east coast of Africa. It is the largest fleet of ships which has traveled in any ocean of the world before the First World War. And there are many books written about their journeys, some of which are fictional, some actually investigative, and some speculate they crossed the Cape of Good Hope, crossed the Atlantic Ocean, and reached even America before Christopher Columbus. But this is not a proven theory, but some speculate, some of these books. Why did the Ming Emperor Shu De decided to send such a large fleet? Well, there are many theories about it, but I believe that it was done to improve trade relations between other countries, between China and other countries. These voyages improved and promoted trade among merchants throughout Southeast Asia and South Asia, and it also cleared sea routes from the pirates who were infesting the seas during that period. And it is interesting to note that the ports that they visited during these journeys, which spanned for 30 years, where they reached 30 countries, corresponds with the current One Road, One Belt initiative of the Chinese government. So studying history is very important to understand the mindset of the Chinese, which I feel has not changed much even now. So during these journeys, I told you that they had 7 journeys over a span of 30 years, but they had only 2 armed conflicts. One was the armed conflict that I'll be describing in detail during my lecture. The other conflict was them killing 5,000 sea pirates off Strait of Malacca in one single day. So you can understand, while visiting 30 to 35 countries or kingdoms with a troop of 30,000 armed soldiers, sailors, for them to avoid many armed conflicts, the person who commanded these ships has to be a great diplomat. He was none other than ZHENG, who was a great admiral and a diplomat. Now, this army had many ammunition which was far ahead of their time. They had gunpowder, they had cannons, they had even rockets which made in China, and handguns. None of the countries they visited had this ammunition. When they visited Sri Lanka for the first time in the year 1405, Sri Lankan political scenario, or the scenario in the country, was very chaotic. The period of 1405 belongs to Gampola period. You know, the history of Sri Lanka is divided into many periods like Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa. During the period of Gampola, the main kingdom was situated in Gampola. But there were many other kingdoms which were even more powerful and richer than Gampola. For example, there was a sub-king at Raigama. Raigama is a place close to Pandaragama. The kingdom of Raigama was powerful than Gampola. Most of the time, the king of Gampola and Raigama were fighting with each other. They united only when they were attacked by Ara Chakravarti of Jaffna kingdom. So this strange relationship between king of Raigama and Gampola has led to the Sinhalese proverb, which is used even now, Raigamai Gampolai, when we describe a strange friendship between two odd characters. Ara Chakravarti's kingdom was, I could say, even more powerful than both these kingdoms, and they were able to come and attack and collect taxes from many ports in the western coast. It is mentioned in Sinhalese chronicles that they were stationed in Nigambo, Wattala, Dematagoda, Panadura, and Gorakan in Moratuwa, and collecting taxes from the ports which are close to these areas. And in addition to that, there were 18 Vanni kingdoms in this country. So you can understand there were so many kingdoms in this country during the time ZHENG had his first visit in 1405. When we look for evidence of a Chinese army coming to Sri Lanka, the only physical evidence we found from Sri Lanka is this famous trilingual inscription. This trilingual inscription was found from Gaul in the year 1911. While constructing a road in Gaul, a British engineer came across a stone slab which he decided to send for analysis. Fortunately for us, he didn't decide to break it to pieces and use to reconstruct the road. When this stone slab was read, people were amazed because it was in 3 languages. In Persian language, it paid homage to Lord Buddha. In Chinese language, it paid homage to Lord Buddha. In Persian language, it was praising God Allah. And in Tamil language, it was praising a god called Tenuvara Nayan. Tenuvara Nayan is analyzed by historians as the Devinuvara Nayaka Devi, or the chief god of Devinuvara, Lord Vishnu. I feel that this inscription was done or made and installed by the Chinese to pacify all 3 religions, all 3 major religions of people of Sri Lanka at that time. An analysis of this inscription showed that it was made in year 1409 in China. So it was a Chinese product. So it was not made here, it was made in China and brought and installed in Gaul. The fact that this was found from Gaul made many to believe that the main port of call of this fleet was Gaul. And this also made this historical story to become doubtful and unclear. Now, when we look at the history books of Sri Lanka, historical chronicles of Sri Lanka, the largest and longest historical chronicle, Mahavansa, is totally silent about a large fleet of ships, Chinese ships coming to Sri Lanka or abducting a king. Alakeshwara Yuddha, which is a small historical chronicle, says that when the Chinese army by a stratagem abducted the king of Lanka, Alakeshwara Mantri, or the minister, stayed in Raigama. And the historical chronicle Rajavalya says that when the king named Vijayabahu was ruling in Sri Lanka, a Chinese army led by a king named Dos came to Sri Lanka, hoodwinking the foolish king by saying that they came to pay tribute to them. They took him to Great China. In the fight which ensued, 4 of his brothers and many of his army was killed. All these chronicles, including the section of Mahavansa, which covers this period, were written 300 years after this incident. So I feel lack of clarity about what is mentioned in these chronicles is due to the fact they were written long after this incident. But there is a religious book called Saddharma Ratnakare, which clearly states who was taken. It says, the king who was taken. It says, the Veela Arakeshwara, after defeating his brother Veerabahu, reigned in Raigama for 12 years and due to his previous sins, got caught to Chinese stratagem and was taken away. Now it says this king was taken to China by a peculiar stratagem because of his sins. So there is no sympathy in this statement about the king who was taken to China. I will describe why it happened so, and according to the dates which are mentioned in Saddharma Ratnakare, this incident took place in the year 1411. So it happened in the year 1411. And there are 3 other books with mentions that this year corresponds with year 1411. And it matches with the Chinese records. Now in China, during that period, you had the Ming dynasty, and the records of them are called Ming Shi Lu, or records of the Ming royal court. These documents have been translated recently by the National University of Singapore, and it's in the web. Now, the incidents between Sri Lanka and China in the 15th century start from the 6th July 1411. It says, so this is a record maintained in the Royal Court of China. ZHENG and others who had been sent as envoys to various countries in the Western Ocean returned and presented Yali Kunair, the captured king of Sri Lanka, and his family members. So king's name is mentioned as Yali Kunair. Now Saddharma Ratnakara says it was Veera Alakeshwara who was taken. Now Veera Alakeshwara belonged to the Alakeshwara clan. So there are many Alakeshwaras. Most famous of them was Nishanka Alakeshwara, who made the port of Sri Javadhira. So this Alakeshwara clan was also known as Alagakkonara, which is a Tamilized pronunciation of Alakeshwara. It is mentioned so in Sri Lankan Sinhalese literature that they were named as Alakeshwara as well as Alagakkonara. So this Alagakkonara is mentioned as Yali Kunair in Chinese pronunciation. So this Yali Kunair has been identified as Alagakkonara. So it was Yali Kunair or Alagakkonara who was presented to the Royal Court of China on the 6th July 1411. And the record goes on to say, previously, ZHENG and others had been sent as envoys to various fan countries. Fan means foreign or alien. However, when they reached Sri Lanka, Yali Kunair was insulting and disrespectful. Yali Kunair wished to harm ZHENG, but he came to know of this and left. Yali Kunair also acted in an unfriendly way to neighboring countries and repeatedly intercepted and robbed their envoys. So he was like a pirate king. All fan countries suffered from his actions. When ZHENG returned, he again passed Sri Lanka and king enticed him to the country. King then had his son Nayan demand gold, silver and precious objects, but he would not give these to him. King then secretly dispatched over 50,000 fan troops to rob ZHENG's ships. They also felled trees to create obstructions and impede his route of return so that he could not render assistance. ZHENG and the others found out about this, and they gathered their force and set off back to their ships. I am reading from the Minshilu record. However, the route had already been blocked. ZHENG spoke to his subordinates saying, the majority of the troops have already been dispatched, the middle of the country will be empty. So he thought that since most were engaged with the Chinese troops in the port, the interior of the country would be deserted. Our merchants and troops are isolated and nervous and will unable to act. If they are attacked by surprise, attackers will achieve their purpose. Thus, he secretly ordered persons to go to ships by another route with orders that government Chinese troops, were to fight to death in opposing the attackers. ZHENG then personally led 2,000 of his troops by a bypath and attacked the royal city by surprise. They took the city, captured alive Yali Kunair, his family members and chieftains. The fan army returned and surrounded the city, and several battles were fought, but he greatly defeated them. He and the others subsequently returned to the court. So it appears that there has been a great battle at the site of the royal palace. Now, at the Chinese royal court, The assembled minister requested that the king be executed. Emperor pitied the king for his stupidity and ignorance and leniently ordered that he and the others be released and given food and clothing. So this is a strange thing to have happened. What we have noticed we have seen in history is once the enemy king is captured, he is killed immediately or taken and imprisoned. But whereas here, ZHENG took all the trouble to capture this king, put him in one of his ships with the other members of the royal family, took them all the way to China, which journey took about 3 months during that period, and present him to the royal court for a proper hearing of this incident and ask the emperor what we should do about this king. And strangely, the emperor pardoned him. And then the emperor says, the Ministry of Strides was ordered to deliberate on and select a worthy member of the family to be established as country's king in order to handle country's sacrifices. So Chinese emperor says, appoint a member from this man's own family or a relative of him as the new king. So this shows that the Chinese did not want to govern this country, either directly or indirectly. What they wanted is some kind of a peace or clarity in this country so that they can continue their trade. So it is very clear from that final order the mindset of the emperor. It is very clear from the entries in Saddharma Ratnakara, as I told, that this particular king was governing from Raigama. If he was governing from Raigama, what was the main port of call of the Chinese army? The main port of call of the Chinese army is mentioned in this book called Ying Yashen Land, which is the overall survey of ocean shores, written in 1433 by Ma Huan, who was a sailor and a writer who traveled with ZHENG in his ships. And I will not read the entire passage, but it says it was Paed which was the main port of call. So this book was translated by Hakluyt Society of Great Britain, which is a society dedicated to studying naval history, and they have identified various places which is mentioned in Ma Huan's book, and they have identified Paed as Beruwala. So the story is very clear. This army came to Beruwala. You can see Beruwala there. And they abducted the king from Raigama, which is close to Bandaragama, which is about 22 kilometers from Beruwala. So the army or the armada came to Beruwala, and the king was residing at Raigama, and he was abducted and taken to China. Even today, there are ruins of a palace at a temple called Patahavatte Pushkararami in Raigama. And this is the wall around these ruins of the palace. And it is the place where this fight between the Chinese and the Sri Lankan army happened. Actually, even after this king was taken to China, this palace existed in this place, and the sub-kingdom of Raigama also existed because the Chinese did not destroy the palace. And this palace was destroyed 150 years later, along with many other important places of Kingdom of Raigama by the Portuguese. They looted a temple at Vidagama, looted this palace, and it was completely destroyed by the Portuguese. Professor Senarath Paranavithana, long years before, I think in 1950s, he had only sketches of this story. But in a book written by him or edited by him, History of Ceylon by University of Ceylon, he has suggested for a Chinese army to take away a king from Sri Lanka, they would have had local informants and supporters. And in my book, I have proven that his assumption was correct. Now, why and how did it happen? Not far from Palace of Alakeshwara, which was at Patahavatte Pushkararamaya, the chief priest of the country, or the Sangaraja, was residing. And that Pirivana is even now called Vidagama Ganananda Pirivana. Veeralakeshwara would have been an unpopular king because he came into power by ousting his own brother Veerabahu. This Veerabahu was a king who donated many things to temples, and it was during his period the famous historical chronicle about the priesthood of Sri Lanka, Nikaya Sangraya, was written. So Veeralakeshwara came to power by ousting his own brother. And even Saddamma Ratnakara says he was taken to China because of his previous sins. So the next king who came into power from Raigama, I will mention his name later, was a student of Vidagama Thero who was residing just about 3 kilometers away from this palace. This prince belonged to a old royal clan, and he was an orphan. And it is mentioned in Rajavaliya several times Alakeshwara attempted to arrest him. And so this is Vidagama Ganananda Pirivana. It is actually, it still stands facing Panadura Ratnapura main road. And Rajavaliya says, when Alakeshwara attempted to arrest this prince from Vidagama Pirivana, he went to hiding at a place called Polvat. Now Polvat is at Mamanal. I visited this place too, and that place still is called Polvat. And there are legends in this vicinity to say that this particular king was in hiding in this Polvat. Now, the Chinese records say a little different story from Sri Lankan chronicles. According to Sri Lankan chronicles, the next king who came into power from Raigama was King Parakramabahu VI. But the Chinese records say that it was a person called Ye Ba Nena who became the next king of Sri Lanka. Now this record of the Chinese royal court belongs to the date of 20th August 1412. So Alakeshwara was present in Chinese royal court in July 1411, and the next entry about this incident is in August 1412. It says, Ye Ba Nena was enthroned as the king of the country of Sri Lanka. Previously, Yali Kunair, the king of the country of Sri Lanka, had been seized for offences he has committed, and the emperor ordered that one of his relatives who was worthy be appointed as the ruler. At this time, Minister of Rights advised, we have inquired from the people of this country, and they all say that Ye Banena is virtuous and worthy. Accordingly, an envoy was sent with an imperial proclamation and a title patent and seal to confer upon him. Now, according to this entry, it was the people of Sri Lanka who selected this king and gave that message to the Chinese saying that we have selected this particular king. And it actually agrees with the Sri Lankan chronicles, which say that the next king was selected by the Vidagama Thero with approval of the Sri Lankan army and the people. So it would have happened in the year 1411 when Alakeshwara was taken to China, and his appointment was approved later on by the Chinese emperor. Now in the entry, it says, then the emperor in his royal patent gives very important advices like this. Patent read, I succeeded to the great undertaking of my imperial ancestor, govern Chinese and Yi, bring great prosperity to all places and excise rule for them. In recent times, Yali Kunan of Sri Lanka, residing on that island in the ocean and possessing an evil heart, constantly oppressed the people and harbored enmity for neighboring countries. I sent imperial envoys with an imperial proclamation and orders of instruction for various fan countries. But when they came to Sri Lanka, this Yali Kunan dared to oppose the way of heaven. He was insolent and not respectful. In an outrageous and evil manner, he planned to kill the court's envoy. However, heaven detested his evil and assisted in his capture. I consider all soldiers and civilians of that country to be my people. So this is also a very strange statement. He says, I consider all soldiers and civilians of that country to be my people. I thus ordered appointment of a worthy and able person to govern them. You, Yebanena, have cultivated virtue and goodness, and you have been recommended by the people. Now I am specially enfourching you as the king of the country of Sri Lanka. Indeed, only by being sincere. Now this is a good piece of advice the emperor gives to the new king of China. He says, indeed, only by being sincere and respectful, you can be firmly established. Only by being benevolent and virtuous can you govern the people. Only by being loyal, you can serve the superior. And only by being trustworthy can you maintain good relations with neighboring countries. You are to respect my orders, long revere the way of heaven, and must not be remiss or arrogant. Thereby, the fief will be received by your sons and grandsons, and there will be prosperity for generation after generation without end. Respect this. So this was the piece of advice the emperor gave to the new king of Sri Lanka. And at that time, the assembled ministers had all requested that Yali Kunan be executed. So when the proclamation was sent, Yali Kunan was also present in the Chinese court. So the other ministers said, kill him. But the emperor said, men and ye are like birds and animals. There is no point in severely punishing them. At this time, emperor forgave him and sent him home. So Chinese records say that the captured king was sent back to Sri Lanka, but there is no records of him as to what happened to Viralakeshwara if he came back to Sri Lanka. I mean, that was not a time where there was a leader of opposition. There can be only one king for one kingdom. If he had come, definitely he would have been killed. So there are no records of him coming to Sri Lanka or as to what happened to him. So another, as I told you, another unsolved mystery in this story is that the Chinese records say that it was Ye Ba Nena who was appointed as the new king of Sri Lanka. But the Sri Lankan chronicles say in that year it was Parakramabahu VI who was enthroned as the new king at Trigama. So who was this Ye Ba Nena? So prior to me writing this book, there have been many explanations to it. Some would say that Ye Ba Nena was a partner or a sub-king. But I found a key to solve this mystery in this poem in the Parakumba Sirita, which is a poetry book written in praise of Parakramabahu VI in the 15th century. This poem goes as such. Melesa tedabala mahat anasaka ati rajun kula pivituru Saulu Vijaba Nirindu Pit Parakum Rajun Hata Munuburu Lamani Jayamaha Lana Himi Suraturu Velu Ran Yuru Sunet Mahadevi Biso Himilat Rajaruwak Sonda Budukuru. Summary of the meaning of this poem is: in the house of such great kings who belonged to the clan of Lambakarna, Jayamahalena, who was the grandson of King Parakramabahu V, who in turn was the son of Saulu Vijayabahu, married the princess Sunetra. Of this union, this great king, or Parakramabahu VI, was born. So this poem says the father's name or the surname of Parakramabahu VI was Jayamahalena. So I was wondering whether Jayamahalena was the name or the surname. Now, in another book written in the 14th century, 1 century before this incident, called Sinhala Bodhivansha, it is mentioned Jayamahalena was a surname given by King Devanampiyatissa to a Lambakarna prince who brought the sacred bow tree to Sri Lanka. The meaning of the word Jayamahalena is the secretary. Lena is secretary or chief secretary of the sacred bow tree. So Jayasiri Mahabodhi. So, from that Jayamahalena, the surname was derived. And this generation of Jayamahalena produced many kings in Sri Lanka, and what the Parakumba Sirita mentions is that Parakramabahu VI was born in this clan. So therefore, before crowning, the surname of Parakramabahu VI would have been Jayamahalena. So now you can see the similarity between the word Jayamahalena and Ye Ba Nena. So that's the way the Chinese pronounce words. So Alagak Konara is pronounced as Yali Kunair. Beruwala became Peloli. So Jayamahalena is Balena or Jayamahalena. So that's the way they pronounce. I found this drawing of which I have described, probably the picture of the grandson of grandfather of Parakramabahu V in a shrine room in Gampula. And the place where I found this is called Nyangampaya temple. Nyangampaya was the place where the tooth relic was kept while the kingdom was in Gampula. And it is this Jayamahalena Sitano, or the, who would have been like a great businessman, who constructed this temple. So this is the picture of probably the grandfather of Parakramabahu VI. So if Jayamalena was pronounced as Yebanena, it is very clear that it was Parakramabahu VI who was crowned in Raigama, who is mentioned in Chinese chronicles as Jayamalena, whose appointment was approved by the emperor in the year 1412, about 9 months after he being crowned in Sri Lanka with the approval of the Sri Lankan army and people. Parakramabahu VI was a great king. He ruled Sri Lanka for a very long period, from 1411 to 1465. He is not recognized as a great king by the Sri Lankans or even the historians. He united Sri Lanka after 300 years of anarchy. Now I told you that by the time ZHENG came to Sri Lanka in the year 1405, Sri Lanka was divided into 3 main kingdoms, 18 minor kingdoms. So this king united Sri Lanka. In doing so, first thing he did was to conquer the kingdom of Gampula and bring the tooth relic to Kotte. Secondly, he conquered 18 Vanni kingdoms. Now, this king was not only a fighter or a conqueror, he was a well-educated king, because Rajavalya mentions that he was studying under chief priest or Sangaraja Vidagama Thero until he was 16 years old. And when he came to power, he was only 16 years old. And this king wrote a Sinhalese dictionary, which is called Nam Ruwanwala. And he initiated the golden era of Sri Lankan literature. During his period, many Sinhalese poetry books such as Guttila Kavya, Sallini Sandeshaya, Paravi Sandeshaya, Gira Sandeshaya, Kokila Sandeshaya, and many more other Pali and Sanskrit books are written. So, while initiating a literary revival, 35 years after coming into power, he decided to conquer Jaffna. Circa 1450, the adopted son of him, Prince Sapumala, led an army from Jayawardhanapura, Kotte, to Jaffna. And the route he took is mentioned in Kokila Sandeshaya, and I went in search of villages and cities mentioned in Kokila Sandeshaya up to Jaffna, and I have proven in my book what the route was, and that the places mentioned are absolutely correct. They crossed the Jaffna lagoon from Punarin, and when they crossed the Jaffna lagoon, the main fort of the armies of Arya Chakravarti was stationed in a place called Javaka Kotte. Now this Javaka Kotte is current day Chava Kacheri. So it's, if you cross the Jaffna lagoon from Punarin down, there's a new bridge across this place called Punarin Sangupiti Bridge. Then you find Javaka Kotte. Now it is not only the armies of Arya Chakravarti which was stationed in Jaffna at that time. There were armies of Vijayanagar Empire who were residing in Jaffna. During that time, Vijayanagar Empire, which was based in Karnataka, was very powerful, and Jaffna was actually a sub-kingdom of them. And Arya Chakravarti was ruling Jaffna with their blessings. The armies of Vijayanagar Empire or the Karnataka armies are mentioned in Sinhalese literature as Kannadi Hamuda. The fact that Prince Sapumal defeated Kannadi Hamuda is mentioned in many Sinhalese poetry books of that era, such as Ira Sandeshaya, Salini Sandeshaya, and many more. So, Prince Sapumal defeated these armies. Another misconception is that Prince Sapumal led a Sinhalese army. Actually, Prince Sapumal's father was a Panikkar. Panikkars are a clan in Kerala who are well versed in Angampura. And this particular prince came to Sri Lanka and got married to a close relative of Parakramabhavu VI. And Prince Sapumal and his brother were actually their children. Parakramabhavu VI adopted them as their own children, own sons. So Prince Sapumal belonged to the Panikkar clan, and it is mentioned in Alakeshwara Yuddha that the armies he led had Tamils, Vanyars, and Panikkars. So it was a joint army which was led by Prince Sapumal to defeat the armies of Vijayanagar Empire and the armies of Arya Chakravarti. Around 1450, after Arya Chakravarti was defeated, he fled to India. And Prince Sapumal was stationed in Jaffna for 16 years. And Mudliya Rasanagam in his famous book Ancient Jaffna says, it was Prince Sapumal who constructed the famous Nallur Kovil. And he quotes a hymn sung in praise of Prince Sapumal in the year 1923 when he wrote this book about ancient Jaffna. So, you can understand that what a different kind of a regime or era Parakramabhavu VI initiated. He made many donations to Buddhist temples. Not only Buddhist temples, there are two Tamil inscriptions one found from Munneshwaram. Still you can see it inscribed in the wall of Munneshwaram Kovil in Chilau, and one Tamil inscription was found from Naimana close to Devinuvara in Madar. So he had made donations to Tamil Kovils as well. So, during the long period of reign of Parakramabhavu VI, there was great improvement in trade relations. He was able to conquer a port in South India called Abhiyaranpatnam and defeat a king who was doing piracy in Indian Ocean. Now, if he lived in our times, I feel he would have been labeled as a pro-Chinese king, because during his time, there were so many delegations which went from Sri Lanka to China. Now in the year 1416 twice, 1421, 1423, 1430, 1433, 1436 and 1445 twice, 1446 and 1459 twice. Now these are the Sri Lankan missions which were present in the Chinese royal court. So you can imagine there may have been many more Sri Lankan people or Sri Lankan missions visiting China during that period. One other interesting mention in Minshilu is about a person called Jayapala Mudali. Kuttila Kavya, which is a famous poetry book written in the 15th century, mentioned that, which was written by priest Vattavi, mentions that it was written on the request of a person called Jayapala Mudali, who was a former Prime Minister of Parakramabahu VI. Now the name of Jayapala Mudali is mentioned as Yabala Mutaliya in Chinese records. So it was not me, it was Professor Senarath Paranithana who immediately identified this Jayapala Mutaliya as Jayapala Mudali. But unfortunately, Professor Senarath Paranithana did not have access to all the records, but I was fortunate to do that. So there are 3 entries about Jayapala Mudali. One, 23rd of March 1445, Jayapala Mudali was present in the royal court and met the emperor. Then 1 month later, he went back to the royal court and requested a golden silk belt as an honor, and emperor granted that. 1 year later, there is a sad story which is reported. It says Jayapala Mudali or Yapala Mutaliya died in Guangdong province, and emperor orders him to be cremated with honors. So this Jayapala Mudali actually died in China. And this entry is also very interesting. Forbidden City, which is a famous tourist attraction in China, was built by Emperor Shu Dai, and it was opened on the February 2nd, 1421. Now it is mentioned in Chinese records about 1,000 foreign people attended this opening ceremony. It is not mentioned in particular Sri Lankan delegation was there, but Sri Lankan mission was present in Chinese royal court on the 25th of February 1421. So it is logical to assume this particular mission would have gone there to attend the opening ceremony of the Forbidden City. Now we come to the last mission, or the last delegate. This is very interesting. Chinese records say that the last delegate came in 1459. Now I got to know that there is a family in Taiwan who has a record book of their family history, and I decided to visit them. They live about 80 kilometers away from the city of Taipei, and this is the record. And it is mentioned that a prince or the son of the king of Sri Lanka came to China in the year 1459. It is recorded in their book. But until I told them that it is mentioned in Minchilu that in that particular year a Sri Lankan mission went to the royal court, they didn't know about this similarity between their record and the Minchilu records. And it says the name of this prince was Ba Nena. Their family book says the prince of the Sri Lankan prince original name was Ba Nena. So can you see the similarity between the names Yabanena, Banena and Jamalena? So I have described in detail and I have almost proven that this was another adopted son of King Parakramabahu the sixth, who went to China, who was sent to China actually, because a Portuguese historian, Couto, says that there were 3 sons, 3 adopted sons of Parakramabahu the sixth, and they were sent on distant missions to avoid a conflict which would happen after his death. So we know that Prince Sapumal was sent to Jaffna. Second prince called Ambulagala Kumaraya was stationed at Ambulagala in Mavanalla, and there is no mention as to what happened to the third prince. He is a missing prince. So I was suggesting that the third missing prince was this prince who went to China, who was sent to China, and his name is Balena. And their family record says Chinese emperor gave him the name Shi because he came from Sri Lanka. And this family name they still have, and I met the 19th, 20th and 21st generation of descendants of this prince. And the name of the leader of this family, elder of this family, is Shilafa. Shilafa. So you can see the name Shi there. In addition to that, I met this lady who came from China. She is in Guangzhou province and she has the name Shi Yin Yi. So the name Shi is there with her also. So these are the two branches of the same family, the descendants of the Sri Lankan prince who went to China. One section is in Taiwan because Taiwan was also part of China before China became a communist country. And the records of the family says I think the 14th descendant of the Sri Lankan prince migrated to Taiwan because of a conflict he had with the royal administration. And that branch is in China, and you have another branch which lives in Taiwan. And I have not visited this place, but several Sri Lankans have visited the place in Guangzhou province, and they say there's a tomb of the prince who initially went to China from Sri Lanka. Now I am coming to the end of this story. You can understand that all these interactions were initiated by ZHENG, who was a great admiral who had to intervene in a conflict in Sri Lanka, but ultimately it resulted in good to both countries. Now, how does this story end? Well, Admiral ZHENG died in the year 1433. He died at sea. And after his death, there was a conflict in the Chinese royal court between two fractions of ministers. One fraction was, they were conservatives, Confucians, who were yearning for a China which is isolated from the world, agriculture based, which should not get corrupt by foreign influence. And there was another more cosmopolitan fraction who were looking for foreign trade, improve China by foreign trade. But ultimately, the conservative fraction won. And the new Chinese emperor who came into power decided to destroy the ships of ZHENG. So they destroyed the entire fleet, burned down the entire fleet. And some of the records, most of the records of his journeys were also destroyed. But fortunately, some records remain, including the Ming Royal Court proceedings and some inscriptions, about 2 inscriptions that were found in China. And there were several inscriptions found in different places of ports that they visited. So that is the story from the Chinese end. What happened to Sri Lanka? After Parakrama VI died, when he died, he did not have his own son to be appointed as the king. He had 3 adopted sons. Therefore, he named his grandson, the daughter's son, as his successor. So, after doing that, a few years after doing that, Parakrama VI died, and his tomb still remains at Pitakotte. You can visit that place, in a place called Kumarakanda, I think. So when the new king came into power, Prince Sapumal decided to come back from Jaffna. He came back with his troops to Kotte, killed the new king and captured power. When he came back to Kotte, Arya Chakravarti came back from India and regained his kingdom. And there was a great fighting between the 2 fractions of the grandson of Parakrama VI and Prince Sapumal. And during that fight, again the 18 Vanni kingdoms came into existence. Upcountry took its own piece and became a separate kingdom. So these things happened between the years 1465 to 1480. And the Portuguese, when the Portuguese came to Sri Lanka in 1405, Sri Lanka was a divided country. So it became an easy prey. Around that period, in 1453, Constantinople fell. And the Europeans were searching for new routes, new sea routes to come to the Indian Ocean. So Vasco da Gama and all the others came to Indian Ocean, and the next century is about the conflict between Europeans and the kingdoms in the Indian Ocean. And China became an isolated country, and it remained isolated for another 500 years until their recent economic revival. So I will end my story here, and it's open for discussion now. Thank you very much.